So 1 in 4 Australians will be made redundant at some point in their career. And the thought of being made redundant can definitely seem scary. Questions like, was it personal? Does this mean I'm a poor performer? How is this going to affect me financially? And will this impact my ability to get a job? Might run through your mind, and they're all very valid and real emotions to feel. But today we're here to shed a positive light on redundancy, because before Mia Freedman founded Mamamia, she was made redundant. And not just that, she was publicly dragged about it. At the end of this episode, you'll see redundancy in a new light. It's not all bad. It can definitely be an opportunity to reset and find something better. A little bit like a breakup. To prepare for this episode, I went out on my Instagram and I had over 2,000 people respond, and 40% of them said that they had been made redundant. And I then asked a follow-up question, how did it feel? It was a really mixed bag. It ranged from, it was a slay, it was the best thing to ever happen to me, I was so well looked after, it led to way better things, to I felt ashamed. It was the most traumatic thing to ever happen to me. I felt worthless and embarrassed. So let's speak to someone who actually has been through it. Mia Freedman. Mia is the founder and creative director of Mamamia, the largest women's podcast network in the world. But before that, Mia was the youngest ever editor of Cosmo and worked on the likes of Dolly, which is iconic, my first ever magazine subscription. And she had a killer career for over 15 years. She then transitioned to Channel 9, where she was made redundant after 12 months. Mia, welcome.
Hello.
From the outside looking in, I feel like you've just come off the highest high of your career, and then you find yourself in this role where you're made redundant after 12 months. What was that like? What was your mindset like at that time?
I was just listening to you describe all the different ways that people feel after a redundancy, what they told you. And I think I felt all of those ways at once, because my situation was slightly different in that I had to fight to get a redundancy. The job that I went to do to be an executive in TV wasn't really a job, and the person who hired me left the company, and I'd had it written in my contract that I was there to report to him. So the job that I was doing had become so awful, and the situation was so unpleasant. The company really wanted me to just quit. And if I'd have just quit, I would have walked away with nothing. But because it was actually the TV company I was working for was owned by the same magazine company that I had worked for, I had like 15 or 16 years of service. So even though I'd been at this one job for not long, I did what a lot of women want to do, which is just get away from a difficult situation. And that would have cost me financially massively. And it was my husband who said, no, you're redundant. Like the thing that you came to do, you can't do anymore. Fight for redundancy. So I fought, and it was really unpleasant, but I finally secured it, which meant that I had like almost a year's worth of salary. And what that did was, even though it was absolutely humiliating and it seemed to everyone like I'd been fired, and I may as well have been fired because my time at this company had been a disaster and I'd achieved nothing, I had that amount of money that I could then use to do my next thing. It bought me time. What my redundancy bought me is time. And for some people that might just be a month. For me, it was about a year, and it enabled me to start a blog and not earn anything for a year, which is a huge amount of time, because I didn't earn anything from Mamamia for more than a year. And so the humiliation and the shame is very, very real. And I think that the most important question to ask yourself is, was I made redundant because my skill set isn't applicable anymore, or was I made redundant because the company changed shape and they had to restructure? And if it's and what you do next depends on your answer to those two questions. Because if it's your skill set, then you have to pivot. You have to really think, okay, I loved being an illustrator, but now it's all gone to graphic design, and the skill that I had, the skill that I've always had, is no longer applicable because of technology, because of whatever. I need to find a different skill set and a different way to get employed. If it's just that the company changed shape and you have valuable skills that could just apply somewhere else, that's a different conversation. But the way that and that's a better situation to be in. The way that I always think about it is from both an employer point of view and how I thought about it when I was made redundant is they've freed my future.
I love that.
Yeah, like my future's been freed. Even if you lose your job, even if you are sacked, you freed someone's future. It's like ending a relationship.
Yeah.
No one wants to be in a relationship with someone who doesn't want to be with them anymore. Nobody wants to be in a job that they can't do. Like, not really. So ultimately, if you think about it, okay, my future has been freed. What next?
Yeah. I think this is so important for women, that advocating for yourself and knowing when you are owed something. And I think many listeners might not know where to begin with those conversations, like advocating for yourself and saying, hang on, my roles are no longer required. I'm owed a redundancy. Like, where did you start with those conversations? Did you get a lawyer?
I didn't have a lawyer in the beginning. I could tell that they just wanted me to quit because, of course, it's just easier, right? It's a problem they wouldn't have to deal with. And then they tried to offer me jobs that were really inappropriate. Like they were
redeploying you?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Like, and they have to do that legally, but also I wasn't qualified to do those jobs. Like, they're like, well, maybe you could just be head of hair and makeup and wardrobe.
What?
Because I had a vagina. So,
Is that a role they offered you?
Yeah. And exactly. And so I was, not that there's anything wrong with that, but that's not that's not what I came for. It's not my skill set. It's not my background. So it was hard. It was really, really hard because I just wanted to avoid confrontation. I just wanted to go, oh, no, I'll just quit. I'll just, I don't want to go back. And I had a baby at the time, a newborn and a 7-year-old. And I just was like, I hate it here. Everyone hates me. I'm failing. I just wanted to get away immediately. And the actual negotiating the redundancy and fighting for what I was owed made for an uncomfortable few weeks. But my God, it was worth it because of what it brought me on the other side.
Yeah. I also think for those listening, and like we're both employers, I find most employers actually do want to do good in the end for their employees. Like most of the time they actually will give you what you're asking for because they also want it to go away.
Or they'll try, because in almost every case, certainly every case I've experienced as an employer when we've had to make people redundant, it's never about the people. It literally is never about the people. It's about needing to change the shape of the business or skill sets that other people have that are that replace this skill set, and it's about budgets. Like it really comes down to budgets, and businesses are called businesses for a reason. They're not you can't just afford to keep people on because you like them, unfortunately. So it honestly isn't personal. So if you can just try to keep your emotions in check as much as possible and be really calm, and you want to leave in the best way possible. I've been so impressed with people I know who have been made redundant in the last year or so, and the way that they've left their businesses has been so impressive and has really made such a difference to their future employment prospects.
Yeah. You negotiate into a company with grace and you put your best foot forward. Yeah. And I think it's really important to remember I've heard it be called like elegantly exit. Like it's such a good thing to remember.
Yeah.
And sometimes you do just have to take the high road.
Yeah.
And just swallow your pride.
You do.
On the not taking it personally side of things, I think I saw a headline that said something like, show's over for Mia.
Yes, because I arranged to leave. I'd been part of launching this new daytime show at Channel 9, and when I left, they didn't tell me they were going to do this, and I completely understand why they did. They axed the show on that day, so it very much seemed like I had been sacked, and it looked very bad. And I completely understand why they did that. And it was so funny. I remember going home and my phone was blowing up and I just sat on my bed with my laptop and my phone next to me. And, you know, the big splash on all the news websites was because there was a lot of publicity around Channel 9 at that time and about women leaving Channel 9 and things. And it was just those kind of headline shows over for me. Big pictures of me back when it was a print newspaper, because this was almost 20 years ago. It was page 3. It was like this big picture of me. And I remember, as humiliating as it was, I remember thinking to myself, oh, well, at least everybody will know that I'm available for employment. So the phone will ring, and yet the phone never rang.
Why do you think that is?
Because, to be honest, my reputation had been damaged so much by the time I'd been at Channel 9 for a variety of reasons. It was the culture there at that time was really bad. There'd been awful like leaks, and it was just a very, very bad culture. And my reputation had really been trashed. And I'd had such a great reputation from the 15 years prior when I'd worked in magazines. I worked really hard and I'd got to the top of my field, and it was like literally wiped out in a matter of months. And so the phone never rang, and I was so shocked by that. I was so hurt and shocked, and I lost all my confidence. But I must have known, I must have suspected, because when I was planning my redundancy when I was thinking about leaving and telling them I wanted a redundancy, and then in the few days that I left, on the day that my redundancy was announced, I pressed go, publish on Mamamia for my first post, because I knew that there'd be a lot of media interest, and I was like, well, best I capitalize on that, because I'll have 24 hours in the news cycle.
Yeah.
This was pre-social media, of course. And I want to make sure people know where I am and they know where to find me. So I did that. My first post was about why I'd left, but I was very careful, and have been careful to this day, to not trash anyone individually, to go with grace, as you just said, elegantly exit. And even though I was personally devastated, bitter, angry, resentful, all of those things, I held it in check.
Yeah.
And that was hard. But I had something to do. So even though I wasn't offered anything, I thought, I'll do this. I'll launch this blog and I'll start it. And while I decide what's going to happen next, and I field job offers. And those job offers never came, which is actually a really lucky thing, because it meant that I had to just keep going.
I feel like you were taken to one of the scariest places, where it's redundancy and then reputational damage, and kind of being dragged publicly in a way that is out of your control, and you're not going to retaliate. You just have to suck it up.
Yeah.
So I do think that would be one of the scariest places to be taken to. How do you rebuild your confidence?
Took a really long time. There's no easy way to say it. It wasn't a magic pill. It wasn't, after the adrenaline of all of that wears off, and now I guess everybody, and I've read a lot of them, now makes those announcements on LinkedIn. And the phrasing of what you say is very important. And I think everybody, there's as you said, 40% of the people who replied to you out of 2,000 had been made redundant. It's a really, really common thing. And it's not like people go, oh, she's shit. She's, got a bad smell about her because she's made redundant. My reputation was destroyed not because of my redundancy, but what had happened during the time I was there, and the stories that had been leaked about me to the press that were not true, and that sort of reputational smearing that happened while I was there. And also the fact that the show I launched sort of didn't work and wasn't very good. And I've got to completely own that. And also the fact that I should never have gone to this job, because it wasn't a real job. It was an idea, but it wasn't a real job. But I was so keen to get out. And this actually speaks to a mistake not to make after a redundancy, because when I left magazines, it was when I had my second child, and I knew I was done with magazines, but I didn't know what I wanted to do next. And I learnt the hard way, never make a big career decision. For me, it's in the 12 months after having a baby. For other people, it might be less. For me, it usually coincides with the amount of time that I'm breastfeeding. I didn't breastfeed her for a year because I had a lot of problems with that. But in that first few months, when I was sleep deprived, hormonal, was having a really hard time, I made the decision. I knew I wanted to leave magazines, but I didn't know where I wanted to go. This job was offered to me and I went, sure. And I jumped at it, and it was really stupid because I didn't think carefully enough, and it wasn't enough of a job. So I didn't do my due diligence. I didn't really prosecute that decision well. So back to never make an emotional decision. That's a really important thing to keep in mind after a redundancy, because you know, it's almost like heartbreak. The first person who comes along and looks at you, you're like, oh, you do like me, okay. And they might be a dickhead.
Yeah.
But you're just so desperate for some validation that you want to be very careful about the thing you do next.
That's so fascinating, because I actually listened to a podcast, and I think it was recommended by Jessie Stevens, and it was about intuition, and it said the time to never trust your intuition. And it's when you're going through a huge emotional change. It actually labels like a breakup, but motherhood would totally be one too. Like your intuition is completely off during moments like that.
That's exactly right. And you are not, for me, I was just not thinking clearly. And it took me a long time to recover from it. And it took me a long time to build my confidence back up and build my reputation. It took me a really, really long time. But I don't think that's the case after a redundancy. I was actually, funnily enough, speaking to someone yesterday who'd just been made redundant in quite a high profile way. But it was very clear that it was nothing to do with her. It was just a restructure of the company. And she was actually feeling great about it. You know, I know a lot of people who've actually been through it lately. And you see the twin sides of the hurt, and of course it's humiliating and you feel ashamed, but you get over that, and the decision you make next is one that can change everything.
Yeah. I think internally it hurts more. Externally, like, the optics really aren't bad, and no one's thinking you're shit at your job.
No, it's like, as an employer also, I'll often look at CVs and there'll be someone who's been somewhere for a year. And I probably stayed at this job. I probably should have left much earlier, but I was so worried about how it would look. Everyone's got that kind of, like, a lot of people have that experience of just going somewhere for a year. The question is the narrative you tell about that.
I've had it.
Yeah, exactly. We've had it. And the question is how anything can be explained with the right narrative. The thing not to do is to say anything negative, whether you were made redundant, whether you lost your job, whether you quit because the place was a nightmare. The point is the narrative that you tell to your next prospective employer.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think
what did you say? What did you, when people were like, oh, you're only there for a little bit of time? And also people love a bit of gossip.
Yeah.
And
they want it to be bad.
And it's often a test. If you're interviewing someone and you're like, oh, what happened? And it's like the minute they start bad-mouthing, even though partly you do want to know the goss, the minute they start bad-mouthing a former employer, for me, that's disqualifying.
100%. My narrative has always been went there to build X skill set, achieved that, learnt a lot, was always gearing up to do this next thing.
Yeah. And even if you say it wasn't for me for these reasons, or you say I was made redundant for these reasons, you've just got to own it, I think.
Yeah. I agree. I think the narrative, it's all about the narrative. You're an employer. How do you view redundancies? Do you see them as a red flag?
I see redundancies as an opportunity. So there's been a huge number of redundancies in media lately. And the first thing we do is see who's been made redundant and often have a conversation with them, see if the skill set of that person and the experience of that person could fit into our company, because every business is a different shape. So all the reasons that someone's been made redundant from one place probably doesn't apply to you. So I see anyone who's been made redundant, my ears always prick up and I'm like, I'm literally, how could we find a way to fit them in? And you've got to be careful as an employer, because you don't want to shoehorn someone in just because they're great on paper, or you know, you've got to make sure that you've got the right hole for whatever shape they are. But it certainly doesn't put me off.
Such a good perspective. It's an opportunity for the individual and it's an opportunity for business owners. Like in the tech world, we will get sent lists of all these amazing engineers, talent that have been laid off at other tech companies, and we look through it like, fuck yeah. Who can we get?
Absolutely. And so that's why you don't have to have your tail between your legs. You just have to own it. And that doesn't mean you can't say to a future employer, yeah, I was really disappointed. I loved it there. Or I was, I understand why it happened. I mean, that's, if you can ever say, I completely understand. Was I disappointed? Sure. but it makes sense.
Yeah. Love that. Okay, and we'll have to do a follow-up episode on how to stay in a job for 12 months when you hate it.
Oh, yeah, man. And should I have just pulled the pin on that first day when I went, and I knew it wasn't right when I'd been trying to work out with my then about to be boss. We'd been trying to land on a title and we just couldn't land on one. And that's a red flag, which I hadn't realised because I had baby brain at the time. But and also because I hadn't really moved companies before. I'd worked for one employer until then. But on that first day, I went and introduced myself to someone in the next office next to me, and they're like, "Oh, what do you do?" And I said, "Oh, I'm the creative services director." And they went, "That's my title."
Oh my God.
And I should have known.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Mia.
Thanks for
Have
having
loved
me.
this chat. And thank God the phone didn't ring and Mamamia exists. Otherwise, we wouldn't be sitting here right now today.
Well, every time that you're available, when you left I wasn't quick enough. When you left your last job after a short amount of time, I was like, oh, how can we get Michelle? So, yeah, I'll have to be quicker next time. It's harder when you're self-employed, though.
Love it.